Hi, my name is Eric Gordon, as was just said, and I'm really happy to be here today with my colleagues Gazbia and Sherif from UNDP Egypt. And really what we're going to do today is provide a case study of a project that we've done together, but specifically we're going to talk about how we work together and sort of the larger issue of how we can shift organizations to accommodate this kind of work. So let me just give you a little bit of background about who I am, and then Gazbia and Sherif will talk about what they're doing as well. So I run a lab at Emerson College called the Engagement Lab. We're an applied research lab that focuses on technology and design and civic cultures. Our expertise is in games and play, but we don't only design games. We're a lab of diverse faculty and students that are working in a number of realms. And we work with partners all over the world. And so a lot of what I want to talk about today, from my perspective, is what it's like to be in a U.S. institution working with partners internationally, and then we'll hear from international partners about how terrible it is to work with U.S. institutions. So that'll be part of our conversation today. The context of this is really is putting games to work, because ultimately when organizations want to use games, they're doing it for a particular reason. There's a problem, hopefully, that they're attempting to solve, and they're using games to do that. And that problem may be engaging people. It may be about explaining complexity. It may be motivating people to action. It may be something else, but typically there is a problem. And often when I work with people, sometimes people come to me and say, "Hey, I want to make a game." And I say, "Well, why do you want to make a game?" And they say, "Well, I don't know. I just want to make a game." And at that point, I've done a lot of convincing people not to make games, in fact, because it's not the right thing to do. But the other thing that's important about games, and it's something that was really true in Egypt, is that games represent an economic opportunity for people. And so when presented with games as a thing to do, it's not just the content of the game or the mechanics of the game working towards some kind of social good. It's seen as an economic opportunity, and in fact, it is an economic opportunity. So just some numbers about Egypt. Well, worldwide, I mean, we've seen these numbers: $91 billion industry worldwide in digital games. In the Arab world, it's $908 million. In Egypt, it's $96 million industry. So these are significant enough numbers, and it's something that my colleagues in a development organization are thinking about. Obviously, economic opportunity being a big part of the work that they do. All right, so I'll say a little bit about the approach before Gazbia and Sherif come up here. The approach that I take is design and/or implement games that change perceptions of or actions within existing civic systems. So I'm very interested in games that do that work. And I should say that sometimes the game as a product is not the most important product of designing a game. And I'll explain it this way, that if you think about systems that we intend to make a dent in, that we intend to change, whether those are economic systems, social systems, civic systems, whatever it might be, I think about systems as being fairly prescribed, or the systems that we actually want to intervene in, where they often move people along, so from point A to point D in a prescribed way. And so think about an education system, for instance, that moves people along from point A to point D without much opportunity for interaction within. The way that I've begun to think about games is through this idea of meaningful inefficiencies. As we know from game studies, if you've read folks like Bernard Suits, the philosopher, has written about games as being fundamentally inefficient systems. They're inefficient systems that you play within rules. The idea that a game puts unnecessary obstacles in your path so that you can make meaning along the way to achieving those goals, but they are not by any stretch of the imagination the most efficient way of getting there. So when I think about games as an intervention technique, I think about creating meaningful inefficiencies within systems that are simply merely inefficient. And there are ways in which we can sort of adopt and sort of reorient systems using games as a methodology. And so the way that we do that is we define problems, what the existing system is. We define a playable problem. How do people actually interact within that system, within that problem, and what are ways in which people can make meaning within those systems? Then there's a game that's designed, and then the system is iterated. So it has to come back, and this is related to the conversation that we just had in here. It has to come back to impact in some way. The impact is not necessarily a good game. The impact is a system that can be iterated, prompted by the game. All right, with that, let me introduce Sherif, who will talk to you. You got your thanks.
Thanks, Eric. Okay. So in UNDP Egypt, we are supporting Egypt and the government of Egypt for development, and this is some current situation of the Egypt. We have unemployment rate of over than 13%, but in the same time, youth in Egypt representing more than 50% of the population in Egypt, and youth since 2012. Youth after the 25 revolution, youth are driving the change in Egypt. That's why we thought about having non-traditional way of making a development project in Egypt or solving the development challenges that we're facing. That's why we need to have some innovative tools and low-cost tools for solving the development challenge. That's why in 2014, we created what's called the Innovation for Development Lab. It's within the UNDP office, working with all portfolios in the office, where identifying development challenge and working through design thinking and human-centered design to providing some solution for these challenges, working with the youth, and youth own this solution. So we work with, as maybe Eric said, that usually work with youth and to co-design the solution together, working together with them to co-design the solution, and then there is this solution either incubated within the UNDP or with other partners to provide the prototype and the proof of the concept. So we are exploring, applying, and then mainstreaming, and then scaling up the solution. Also, at the same time, while we are working with the youth, we also identifying the challenges that facing youth, either entrepreneurs working with the laws or others. So also, we are taking these challenges of facing them and then working with the government for policy and advocacy to help them to facilitate or enabling the environment for the entrepreneurs. So I will give the floor now to Eric to talk about the Engagement Lab and UNDP Egypt experience.
Great. So when we started working together, and I just want to quickly take you through this this story before Gazbia comes up here. We started working together in 2014 when I actually came to Cairo I was invited to give a talk and to do a workshop as part of what was called Shift Week, which was this sort of global innovation sort of network of events that happened during 1 week in 2014. And so we were part of this global innovation event, and in Egypt, we did an event on games. It was the only one in the world that was part of this UNDP Shift Week that was on games in particular. It was a huge turnout. There were over 400 people showed up for a talk on games for development that was hosted by the UNDP. Over 40 people participated in a 3-day workshop, and it was incredibly competitive. 40 people got in, but many people were actually turned down. There was we had to sort of turn a bunch of people away. So what we got from that was this massive outpouring of interest, and that interest was coming from all sorts of places. Part of it was coming from what we were saying before, coming from the fact that there was economic opportunities in games, and so that was really important. And a lot of people are overskilled and underemployed. But then there was also an idea that games, these things that people loved, could be applied and used to address the social ills that were impacting them on a daily basis. So after this event, we thought, okay, that was great. Then I went back to Boston, and we just kept talking about, okay, how do we keep this going? I mean, what do we do after we've done this? And so one of the things that we did was some people that were part of we did train the trainers, people who were part of the workshop. We actually trained people to do other workshops. So the workshop we did was in Cairo. The idea was that we would train people to do workshops in other parts of the country. And so we would just sort of spread the idea that way. And actually, why don't I bring Gazbia up right now to talk about some of the things that came out of the workshops and some of the people that we had involved from that first year.
So I'll walk you through just a couple of examples of what came out of these initiatives. So Ayman was a participant in our workshop. He was very passionate about teaching children and finding alternative ways of teaching children because we have the public school education system in Egypt isn't really, doesn't really promote creativity, and it's very, very traditional. So he started creating his own digital games that adapted the public school curriculum for kids, and it's really an untapped market in Egypt. So it provided a big opportunity for him to create change and at the same time a good business opportunity for him. Story Changers was also a very interesting game that was created by a group of young people who also worked in a national initiative focused on education as well. And they wanted to work on the idea of promoting creativity in learning and remixing stories. So basically, it's a board game where you bring different stories like Beauty and the Beast and let's say the Jungle Book, and then try to find ways to merge them together. So it promoted innovation, creativity, and reading. So building on what Eric was talking about the workshops that we were doing and finding ways of sustaining the programs, we're always looking at what's next, what's the next thing that we can do, how can we institutionalize the work that we are doing, and how can we make it more structured. So at the end of last year, we launched the Game Changer Fellowship, where we invited, we launched a call for applications and got 5 young people to work on games of their own. The Engagement Lab is providing the technical support while we are also giving them the space and connecting them to the local ecosystem and network in Egypt to help them develop their games. So we just piloted this, so of course we're facing some challenges, and that's the lesson here, that we're always building the program bit by bit, always looking at what kind of challenges are we facing and how can we make it better, and we're already in discussions on how to make the next round even better. So we're learning as we go. So the fellows are also facilitating their own workshops. So we're trying to spread this idea of games can be used for good, games can be used for social change, and building the capacities of other people to spread that knowledge and motivate others to take action. So as you know, there are the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals, and what makes them different from the Millennium Development Goals is that there was a participatory process in coming up with these 17 goals. So we think that it also games and other innovative tools provide a great opportunity for advancing these goals, and a great potential for the games industry as well to kind of push forward the SDGs and create games and use their skills in realizing these goals. So Eric can continue.
Okay, so the last thing we want to talk about before we open up for some questions is how we're trying to kind of make this program better. So one of the things that we're doing now is we're now trying to connect the fellowship program with the Sustainable Development Goals, and we're sort of coordinating these things together. We're also, so the model here is that starting next year we're going to accept another class of fellows. And we're gonna pick a single sustainable development goal that we're gonna actually work towards. And so instead of having 5 different projects that the fellows are working on, they're gonna be working on a single project. And this year we had the opportunity to connect them with Emerson students who will be working with the fellows. We'll be going to Egypt in January, co-developing a game or several games around a particular development goal over the course of the spring semester. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to harness what we can do with universities here in the United States and what we can do with the energy and capacity of development organizations to bring people together to actually co-produce games that are meaningful, or even to go through the process of designing games. And that's, I guess, the last thing I'll talk about. You know, what's interesting about all this is that there's so much enthusiasm about making games and again, a focus on the final product, that we want to create products that will actually have this impact in the world. What's really interesting is that when you see games actually functioning within organizations, sometimes the real power of games is the representation of games themselves and not the actual function of the game. And what I mean by that is that when someone from the UNDP says, "Hey, we're making a game," people are like, "Whoa, you're making a game, that's awesome." And then that has power. That changes things within the organization. And on one hand, we should be critical of that, but on the other hand, we should also say, we can use this rhetorically and we can do things with that. And so I see that happening not just within international organizations, but even within organizations here in the United States. Again, this is an issue that's been talked about by many people here at this conference, but this tension between fun and seriousness is something that plays out all the time. That when is it appropriate to make a game about something, especially when you're dealing with large bureaucracies? You know, so when we make a game about violence against women and gender equality in Egypt, you know, how is that perceived? What are the representations of that, both within the organization, within the UNDP, and outside? And that's a really important thing to play with, that tension, that cognitive dissonance that emerges when you do this work. That I think that all organizations are struggling with as they take this to the next level. And then finally, the last thing I'll say is that organizational roadblock of that perpetual beta. The idea that organizations are supporting these games, but they're keeping them at arm's length. They're saying, well, this is an experiment, and we're going to treat it as an experiment, and we're never going to actually own it. And this is something that I think is so interesting about the UNDP Egypt in particular. I mean, in Egypt, that you have, I think, the largest innovation unit in the world, right? Of any UNDP office. What's that?
For UNDP.
Yeah, that's what I mean. For UNDP, of any office in the world, UNDP Egypt has the largest innovation unit. And often in other countries in the UNDP system, the innovation office is an intern, you know? And so it's interesting when you have the capacity, like in Egypt, to actually take these innovations and to bring them into the mainstream. You can do a lot. And so I think what I'm learning so much from working with Egypt, because you're the closest to a mainstreamed innovation office that I think I've ever experienced. And I think that's something that I think other organizations can really take to heart. And that's it. Thank you very much, and I hope we have time for some questions. You guys want to? I think we have a few minutes for questions, if there are.
Okay, actually, this is the plans for us that not franchised within franchised within the UNDP system. So whatever we are doing with the engagement lab to develop the model, and then this could be replicated in other countries. For instance, when we did last year the second Games for Change workshop, there is staff members coming from other UNDP organizations, and now they are talking also with Engagement Lab to see how they can. Even there is other UNDP country offices, but on a small scale, that also develop some games with Engagement Lab.
But I think it's a good question, though, of like, how do you scale things organizationally? And I think that's always the problem, because organizations are good at doing some things, but they're terrible at communicating. And so, just getting that thing, and organizations will often, all bureaucracies see themselves as being tragically unique. And so it's really hard to move from one bureaucracy to another. So the communication hurdles, you mean between the people in Boston and the people in Cairo? Yeah, so I'll say a few words about that. One, this mechanism of actually having a class and bringing the students over to Cairo, we haven't done that yet. What we've done now is it's been faculty or staff of the engagement lab that have gone to Cairo, and then we've communicated in a kind of ad hoc way. We haven't systematized it in the way that we're about to. So I think we're going to run into other hurdles. Our plan right now is that we're meeting on Skype once a week after we get back to Boston, and we're going to continue that development process. So I mean, I've done long, long distance development projects before, and they're always difficult. But I think with Gazbia and Sherif, they'll be a joy. I could take that too, I guess. It's a really good question, and it's something that the way in which we're measuring. I mean, right now what we've been doing is we've been building the intervention, and we haven't done much measuring at all, which is kind of funny since I'm a researcher by by occupation. But it's hard to get there. It's hard to get to that point where we say, okay, here's where we see the impact, so we can measure that thing. Right now we're kind of in that formative stage where we're trying to understand what's measurable. But we have every intention when we get to this next phase to look more closely to that and building into the program.
Just added to Eric that because this is in the initial stage for this. So what we are our objective, it was in the beginning that to raise the awareness within the UNDP inside, because it's difficult as I mentioned, that to come to my boss telling him that I'm developing game, where I'm a portfolio manager and I have to develop some project, so I'm developing game. So it's first raising the awareness within the organization, which is okay now. Then with the community and with the government, and then the entities and civil society. So then the second stage would be, as you mentioned, that to measure the impact of this.
Yes, I definitely think so, because we already see that there's a rise in games, especially analog games in Egypt. There are two companies that are starting to build analog games for social change or focused on social issues. And they've been approaching us and telling us no one has really been working in that area. It's a really niche space, and we're very excited that you're getting into it. And we can already see from Ayman's experience that it can be very viable, and there's a lot of potential, but there still needs to be a lot more awareness around how games can be utilized for serious issues, and also encourage entrepreneurship.
But both of the projects that were shown here, those are both commercially viable products. I mean, that's what's interesting about them. They both started businesses, they're from the workshop. So there's opportunity there, but I mean, I think the larger issue is that the private sector, it's unclear how well the market can support it, right? So it is sort of trying to get into an emerging market, one that's not quite there yet, and that's one of the other challenges that we face in anywhere in the developing world, trying to sort of insert into inchoate markets, basically.
Actually, the government has been very supportive of this, and for example, one of the public government institutions is the ITI, Information Technology Institute, and that's actually one of our projects. And they have they create a program for young people, an educational program, and one of their tracks is on games. So we thought that's perfect. We have a very good relationship with them, so why don't we start there? And this is what we did. And then now the National Council for Women, which is the government entity focused on gender issues in Egypt, has been approaching us, and they want to begin developing games. So there is starting to be that awareness and that engagement. So yeah.
Even they are discussing with us now that to develop a games for empowering or training the woman for in political participation. So this is something that they feel that this is important for them, because they are doing training for women now in the governorates for political participation and to go for the election. So they were discussing with us to develop a game for to train the women on this.
One more. You want to take that?
It's about
Yeah.
coding and programming. Actually, we have other programs related to coding and programming that we're doing with Microsoft, and there is a huge gaming industry and people with the skills, but they don't know how to channel. They don't understand that they can channel their skills into social goods. So instead of using their skills to create games that are for entertainment, that they can start using their skills for creating games for social change.
Well, and I don't have the actual numbers off the top of my head, but just anecdotally, there a lot of people that came to the workshop were coders. And they're underemployed, you know, so that there's an incredible amount of skill there that's untapped because the industries are undeveloped. All right, I think we're out of time, and there's a big keynote happening now, so thank you very much.
Thank you.